All right. So, hi, I'm Siddharth. I work on the design systems team at GitHub, and I mostly work on maintaining a library called Primer React. Most of my code is, it's a public repository, so if you want, you can steal stuff, you can fix my bugs, I appreciate it. And I want to talk about building accessible React components. Now, I know it's the last talk of the day, it's really late, everyone's a bit tired, attention spans are low, so maybe I can help you out a little with that. So we're going to talk about building accessible React components, and especially from a screen reader aspect. But fair warning, I'm not an accessibility expert, I'm just a silly React boy, but I have spent a lot of time working with accessibility experts. So I've picked up a lot of knowledge from them, and if you're also a developer who's trying to get into accessibility, then maybe a developer introduction could be a nicer introduction for you. All right. How many folks work on accessibility? Like it's part of your process. Can I get a raise of hands? Oh, that's a lot. Very nice. How many of you also spend a lot of time with screen readers, like using a screen reader? OK, less hands. Got it. Perfect. Cool. I like less hands because that means you'll not be bored. There's something for people to learn. And so what are things that you need for creating an accessible experience? If you go on Twitter, this is kind of like a pretty popular joke, which is like, you should use a button instead of a div because you should care about accessibility. And it's usually followed up with like a purple image with some code, and there's no alt text on the image, obviously. So if we listen to the Twitter shamefluencers, you need to use a button instead of a div, and that's kind of it. We could just go home now. Thank you for coming. But of course, there's more. So nice. Commit to the bit. So for example, I have this UI, and it's borrowed from GitHub, and there's this tabs component that we have. So it's a pretty dense component, and it has 3 tabs, and there's a lot of information packed in. And I think tabs is a really interesting pattern because we kind of all just agree that the first tab is selected because it has a hill on it, and the other 2 tabs are not selected. There's nothing telling you that the first tab is selected, but we all kind of agree to this design pattern. But what about people who can't see your hill? What about people who are blind or have limited visibility and they use screen readers? What does their experience look like? So let's try it out. I won't make you close your eyes. I just like put a banner on top. Like I hit the UI. Let's enable this. So smart. I didn't even plug in the audio. OK, let me try again.
VoiceOver on application, React app.
All right, so that's how VoiceOver starts. To give you context, it announces where you are. We are in a React app.
Code, menu pop-up, button, has keyboard focus.
It tells you where is the keyboard focus right now. So in our case, even though we can't see it, we can tell that it's on a button. The button's text is code, and it has a menu pop-up. So because it said it has a menu pop-up, I can press the Enter key to open the menu pop-up. So I'm going to do that.
Local, button. Coda spaces, button. Copilot, button. Copy URL to clipboard, button. HTTPS, GitHub Primer React Git, content select open with GitHub Desktop, button. Download zip, button. Local, button.
Oh, I see it like loops back to button. So when we were looking at it visually, we could tell there's a lot of information hierarchy. There's a hill, there's some tabs, and you can tell which tab is selected, what are options. But if you're using the same UI with a screen reader, all I heard was like button, 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 and button. And there was an input which was too long. So I did not use a div there. I did use a button, so I did the right thing. But if you look at this UI, all of these things are essentially buttons. There's some buttons, these 3 buttons on the top. There's a copy button. These 3 are also buttons. So how do we differentiate these? And this is where you have to go through. Of course, you still have to use the correct HTML spec. So maybe I'll just use a tabs element, right? Maybe that's the answer. But of course, there is no tabs element because we're in like browser land, so there's only div and buttons to play around. And this is where the accessible rich internet application spec comes in, or ARIA. And ARIA has a bunch of things. So the main thing here is that for semantics that are missing, ARIA provides a set of roles that convey accessibility semantics. So you can use a div or a button, and then you can add semantics to that div or button. So one of the key things is there's a bunch of roles, there's a long list, and the one we're interested in here is called the tab list role. So to go back to the code, I have this div, I can add role tab list, and to my buttons, I can add role tab. And that will tell screen readers, browsers, all assistive technology that these are the semantics that should be attached to it. And this is kind of like a complicated thing, but if you have a button and you're saying role tab, and we're going to redesign it anyways, does it even matter if it's a button? Might as well just use a div, right? It's a div role tab. The only thing that you do have to add is a tab index so that users can still use it by keyboard navigation. OK, so quick demo again. Let's see what we have now. Oh, and role tab panel doesn't matter. OK.
Menu pop-up button.
OK, menu
Local.
pop-up.
Selected. Tab. 1 of 3. Coda spaces. Selected. Tab. 2 of 3. Copilot. Selected. Tab. 3 of 3.
So what's pretty cool here is that there are a few really nice things happening. The first one is that it doesn't say button anymore. It says it's a tab. It tells you how many tabs are there. It tells you that whatever tab you're on is the selected tab. And it pronounced code spaces as coda spaces, which is the correct way to pronounce it. Something weird about here is that it just said all of these tabs are selected, even though visually you can see that the local tab, the hill is on the local tab, but it says Copilot selected tab. And that's because screen readers don't really know the hill. It's just something weirdly, I would love to know how that happened, but it's just something we all agree that this is what a selected tab looks like. But for somebody who's not a visual user, they can't actually see it, neither can the screen reader. And this is where we have to go back to the ARIA spec. And ARIA has these things called properties and roles, which is pretty cool. So states and properties, sorry, not roles. States and properties provide specific information about an element, like selection, and you can tell its current characteristics or its relationship with other elements on the page. So if I go back here, all I need to do is add ARIA selected, and then I'm still using my React logic that I was using to show the class name, but I'm also using it for ARIA selected now. So whichever tab is selected will have ARIA selected true, the other one would have false. All right, quick test.
Local. Selected. Tab. 1 of 3. Coda spaces. Tab. 2 of 3. Copilot. Tab. 3 of 3.
Nice. So it still announces all the tab, but it only said selected for the first one, which is perfect. Now, if I wanted to, let's say, copy the URL, I would need to go back to the first tab, right? So tab is confusing, but the keyboard tab key is how you go forward. And if you hold shift and press the keyboard tab key, that's how you go backwards. So let me go back to local.
Coda spaces. Tab. 2 of 3. Local. Selected. Tab. 1 of 3.
All right, now, how do I get to the button that's inside? I guess I just tab through again. That seems right.
Coda spaces. Tab. 2 of 3. Copilot. Tab. 3. Copy URL to clipboard. Button.
So I did come inside, but it feels like something is really off because even though I was on the local tab, just to get through the local tab panel, I had to go through all the other tabs. And there were just 3 of them, but it still feels very off. And that's because we're doing something strange, silly here, where we do have 2 of these roles. We have a role tab list, and we have a role tab panel. And tab isn't the only way to navigate. So if we go back to the spec, there's not a lot about keyboard navigation, but there is this one paragraph that says, in rich internet applications, the user tabs to significantly complex widgets, such as a menu, a spreadsheet, or tab list, and uses arrow keys to navigate within the widget. So the within the widget is a very interesting idea. So what we would want is that within the tab list, you can use right and left arrow keys. And when you press tab, you should exit the tab list and enter the tab panel. So how do we implement that? So the first thing to do is we have to remove all of these tabs from the tab order. So I'm going to change tab index 0 to -1 so that they no longer can get access. But I still need a way to enter this tab list. At least one of them should have access. So I'm going to give the current selected tab a tab index of 0. I realize I'm saying tab a lot. And everything else would have -1. So you can enter through the selected tab and then scroll around and then exit from the selected tab. Cool. And then how do you switch tabs? Well, it's good old imperative code where you do an on key down event, and if event.key is arrow right, then focus the next tab. If it's left, then focus the previous tab. And the code inside this really looks like document.query selector, find the next tab, and call .focus on it. So it's very imperative code. And then you just do it for all of them. Let's see. All right. Yeah, so you see if I press right and left, I can go through these. And if I press tab, I would enter the panel. And then I can also shift tab to go back. Perfect. So I really like what we've done here. And this is such a common pattern that we actually have a hook for this. And we call this use focus zone, which accepts what keys are to be bound. So in this case, I want arrow horizontal. It could have also been arrow vertical. It's pretty flexible. And again, all of this code is open source, so feel free to steal all of it. All right. The last thing here is kind of interesting because what you can also do is change tabs not just on click, but also the moment this tab gets focused. So for example, I'm changing the tab here, and the tab panel is also changing along with it. And this is an interesting thing because the spec actually has no opinions about this. The spec does not actually say when should the tab change. And this is where you have to go to the ARIA authoring practice guide, or the APG. And the APG has a lot of patterns. So one of them is, of course, tab list. And it actually goes through, these are the kind of interactions that you should handle. This almost is like a checklist. But the caution here is that while the ARIA spec is a spec, it's a recommendation from W3C for browsers, accessibility software, and software authors like you and me. The APG is what they call an informative resource, which is like a nice way of saying it's just a blog. So something that you read in the blog isn't really conformative, but I think it's still a really good resource to learn. And I think this is how our industry progresses in general. The spec gives you something, and then people form patterns on top of it, and the patterns get popular enough that everybody has to use them, and then they go back to the spec. Similar to, I don't know how we all agree that a hill means a selected tab. It's the same way here. All right, so what have we learned? Things we need for an accessible experience. We still need to use the correct HTML element for as much as we can, but we need to add ARIA roles that convey semantics and structure. ARIA properties and states can add things like selections and relationships. And finally, you need keyboard navigation to be able to navigate through the UI better. Of course, there's more. So I have this another example where this is like from the settings page of GitHub. So you can select how you want to be notified. I like email, and then when I click email, it gives me a bonus option, which is only notify for failed workflows, which I think makes a lot of sense. And this is a pretty good UI, and if you read my HTML, I think it's pretty nicely written as well, where I did all the right things. I have a button, I have a form, it has a field set, it has a legend, all the inputs are connected to labels. So this is like very accessible code. Let's see what the screen reader sees. So we're going to count the number of options that exist in the form.
Me, never, menu pop-up collapsed, button.
All right, so it says notify me, and it also says never, which is the value, so that's cool. And then because it said menu pop-up collapsed, I know I can press enter to open it.
On GitHub, on tick box, select notification channels, group.
That's pretty cool. So it announces what is the current options. It says on GitHub. It says it's an unticked tick box. So that's a checkbox. It's not selected. And then it also tells you this is part of a select notification channels group. So that tells you that there are other options as well, which means I can tab and find those other options. All right, so there's one option which is on GitHub. I'm going to tab.
Email, untick, tick box.
Okay, that's the second
App,
option.
untick, tick box.
All right, that's three
Cancel,
options.
button. Save, button.
Cool. So after these, I got to cancel and save, which means there were only 3. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back, select email that I like, and then probably save.
Cancel, app, email, untick, tick box. Tick, email, tick box.
That's cool. So when you select it, it also tells you now it is ticked email tick box. And now because this is a form, and I saw my 3 options, I like the one I picked, it's a form, I can just press enter to save, right?
Changes saved. Notify me. Email. Menu pop-up collapsed. Button.
Perfect. It also announces what is selected. Seems very accessible, right? Did anyone catch what went wrong? Yeah, I see a few hands. Nice. We have this code here, which I feel is very common to do in React, which is we only show this option when at least one of the options is selected. So the 4th option is a conditional option. And I feel it's very common in React to put a conditional, and then if it's false, then you render null. Only if it's true do you show the option. But I'm going to play the animation again because I spent a lot of time on it. Both that one and the actual UI one. So you see the UI gently opens up, and I spent a lot of time to do it with CSS height 0 animation, and I did not use framer motion because it's bundle size. But it's kind of really cool. But it's all nonsense because if you're not a visual user, not only would you never see the animation, you would never discover that this exists in the first place. So this is kind of like a general advice where don't hide things from people. It would be nice if it's always visible. Now, of course, there is a condition that you can only select it when any other option is also selected. On itself, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So a common thing people do for that is you add a disabled prop. Fun fact about the disabled prop, disabled elements are actually not part of tab order. So if I tab through this UI, it would just skip it, which is kind of like, so now also it's not accessible because people would never come across it until they select something else. So disabled is kind of a problem that way. A good replacement for this is ARIA disabled, because ARIA disabled still keeps it in the tab order, but it announces in a way that is disabled. And then you have to, of course, use your own classes to style it the same. Let's see what happens here.
Only notify for failed workflows. Dimmed untick. Tick box.
Nice. So it does get focus. It gets announced that it reads the whole thing out, only notify for failed workflows, and it's a dimmed tick box, which is macOS VoiceOver's way of saying that this is dimmed, it's disabled. Different assistive technology use different languages. This is just VoiceOver on Mac. It says dimmed. And we need to, this is the interesting part. With something disabled, you can't really interact with it. ARIA disabled only tells the screen reader what are the semantics. It doesn't change anything else. So you have to kind of take control and add the checks in place. So I have to change the on change here so that it doesn't fire if my rules are not satisfied. All right. And it would be nice if it also told you why it is disabled. So that is where something called ARIA description or ARIA describe by takes place. So I can add ARIA describe by, and the ID I give it, the screen reader would find the element with the same ID and use that as the description. And do I have a demo again? Yes.
Only notify for failed workflows. Requires at least one channel to be selected. Dimmed untick. Tick box.
Nice. So now you know what option existed. You also know why is it disabled, and which means I can go and enable something. All right.
Notify me. Never. Menu pop-up.
OK, let's try to look at the whole demo and see if it
Only
makes
notify
sense.
for failed workflow.
OK, sorry. Start here. OK, I don't know what I did wrong,
Notify me.
but
Never. Menu pop-up collapse. Button. On GitHub. Untick. Tick box. Select notification channels. Group. Email. Untick. Tick box. App. Untick. Tick box. Only notify for failed workflows. Requires at least one channel to be selected. Dimmed unticked. Tick box. Cancel. Button. Can only no add. Email. Unticked. Tick box. Tick. Email. Tick box. Add. Only notify for failed workflows. Unticked. Tick box. Tick. Only notify for failed workflows. Tick box. Changes saved. Notify me. Email. Failed workflows only.
All right, so without looking at anything, just listening, were you able to tell how many options are there, how many options are conditional, and in the end, how many options were saved? Yes? It would be nice if I didn't show the answer at the end, and then I could ask you as a quiz, but that's okay. And personally, I feel we kind of ended up making the UI better as well, because even for sighted users, this feels like a better UI where we actually tell people why something is disabled, and we still get to flaunt that CSS animation that I spent too much time on. So what have we learned? So the 4 things that we learned before, and that you have to design with accessibility in mind. It's not just an engineering thing, it's also a design thing, that if you don't design with accessibility in mind, you might do things like this, where disclosing things as we go on is a pretty common pattern. It makes cleaner UIs, but in the spirit of creating something minimal, you might also be creating something inaccessible. And so you have to be careful when disabling elements, and it's generally better to use ARIA disabled, unless you want it disabled from everybody. All right, of course there's more. I'm going to be a bit quick about this one. So this is the example I have, where I have this label selector, and it's kind of nice. You can select as many labels. I select 2, and then I hit save, and then it also shows what was selected. I mean, it's pretty common UI, and I think it's pretty good. But what is the screen reader here? Cool, let's see. And the code is similar to the previous demo. It's a form with a bunch of checkboxes. So
Labels to issue. 0 labels applied. Menu pop-up collapsed. Button.
oof, can we boost the volume just a little bit? So you start with this thing where it says add labels to issues. It tells you how many labels are applied. It tells you a menu pop-up. We know the drill. Press enter.
Duplicate. This issue or pull request already exists. Untick. Tick box. Select labels. Group.
Nice. So it tells you duplicate. It also has a description. So it tells you this issue needs and it's untick tick box, and it's part of the group. Very similar to the previous one. So I'm going to hit tab to go to the next option.
Enhancement. New feature or request. Untick. Tick box.
All right, I like enhancement. I'm going to select it.
Tick. Enhancement. New feature or request. Tick box.
Sweet, let's go further.
Bug. Something isn't working. Untick. Tick box.
Don't want that.
Good first issue. Good for newcomers. Untick. Tick box.
Perfect. I'm going to select that as well. And then I'm
Tick.
just going to
Good first
save.
issue. Good for newcomers. Tick box.
So to save, I guess I just tab till I get to save, and then I can save this. Tab.
Up for grabs. Anyone can take on this work. It won't fix. This will not be work. Patch release. Minor release. Major release. Size. 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 Chippy. Chippy. Choppa. Choppa. Constrict. Dot. Depend. Fr. Develop. Save. Button.
Great. I think that's pretty good HTML. Like everything is accessible, all the labels are ordered, and this seems like such a easy to use UI visually, because you can just there's a big scrollable list, but you can just hover over save and go forward. But this is kind of the trick with user-generated content, where in settings we just had 3 options, but in labels you can add as many as possible. And at GitHub, we really love labels, so it's like wholesale. You can add hundreds of labels sometimes, which creates a very difficult to use UI.
Up for grabs. One fix. Add labels to issue. 2 labels applied. Menu pop-up collapsed. Button.
Okay. I don't know why I made this slide. This is just a flex that it actually works.
Visited. Link. Enhancement. Visited. Link.
I'm going to skip that as well. Cool. So what went wrong here? It seems like there is this list, and it would be nice if we could bring some of the keyboard navigation from the previous example, where you could navigate this separately from the footer. But the problem here is that you can't really do that because this whole thing is a form, right? We can't really introduce keyboard navigations as we want without the matching pattern. So if you have a form should be navigable by the tab key. And we can't really change that expectation because semantics have meanings and keyboard navigation goes with certain semantics. So what we can do, however, is break this into two. So this can just be a div with a few buttons, but what's the first part? It could be a select with multiple set as true. This is kind of like a quirky thing where select, we've only used to like single selects, but the select HTML tag actually supports multiple. But it's not, I'm not even going to demo it because it's not very nice to use. So I'm just going to skip to what else you can do is a div with a role. And if you look at all the roles, a role that fits really well is the list box role. So I'm going to add that and show you how it works. So on the field set doesn't need to be a field set. It can just be a div role list box. And all of the things inside it have to be role option. So you can see it's very similar semantics as a select, just that the top level is not a select, it's a list box. And then the form, we don't need the form anymore. Similar to the previous example where you need aria selected, you need to handle aria described by. The input checkbox is now an element that does nothing, so we can replace it with an icon. So I'm just using an icon that looks just like the checkbox, and I can switch between ticked and unticked. And now I can add the example from the previous one, which is my hook to add focus zone. Okay, now, and then I'm also going to give this part an aria label as well, and I'm just calling it a list of labels. Cool. So similar to the previous example, just different role. And let's see how that works.
Labels to issue. 0 labels applied. Menu pop-up collapsed. Button. Duplicate. This issue or pull request already exists. Not selected. 1 of 37.
OK, sorry about that. Yeah, so it announces the first label, which is duplicate. This issue or pull request exists. And it says not selected. And it tells you how many are there. So it's 1 of 37. So if you're a screen reader user, you know how many you're expecting.
Enhancement. New feature or request. Not selected. 2 of 37.
I'm going to select that.
Enhancement. New feature or request. Selected. 2 of 37. Bug. Something isn't working. Not selected. 3 of 37.
Don't need that
Good
one.
first issue. Good for newcomers. Not selected. 4 of 37.
Yeah, I'm going to select that as well. And now, if I want to escape this place, what I can do is just press tab.
Leaving list of labels. Edit labels. Button.
And it takes me out of the tab list, or out of the list of labels, and actually announces that now you're leaving list of labels. So if I press Shift Tab, it will also take you back in.
Entering list of labels list box. Good first issue. Good for newcomers. Selected. 4 of 37.
So we've created these two widgets that can have their own independent selection. The first one uses arrow keys up and down, and when you press tab, you can exit it. So it creates a similar experience as a sighted user. You focus on the parts you want, and then you exit that, and you focus on the next part. Nice.
Leaving list of labels. Edit cancel. Button. Save. Button.
OK, perfect. Now, there is something interesting here, though. No matter how you see this, the list is very long, so it would be nice if we could also add a filter to this. So this is something that we actually do, which is you have an input box at the top, which helps you filter labels. And something that's very interesting is that if you're searching for something that doesn't exist, for example, let's say a deployment label, if you're a sighted user, when you type, you see the results filter. And the moment you type something that doesn't exist, you kind of know very early that they weren't. So I don't have to type the whole deployment word out. I know very quickly that this doesn't exist, and I can maybe create one or look for a different one. But what happens if you're a screen reader user?
Filter labels. Edit text. Blank.
OK, so it starts with announcing that now your focus is on a filter label. That's great.
D, E, P, L, O Y N E N T S.
Yeah, so you don't really know while you're typing if the labels exist or not, and only when you tab inside would you actually find out.
Clear filter text. Edit labels. Button.
Huh, interesting. So because this is just a div where we added our notice and we give it some pretty CSS, this doesn't even get focus. So now the only way to know that there were no labels is if from the input you directly reach the footer buttons and there were no labels anywhere, so maybe there are no labels. This is kind of a pretty bad experience. So what we can fix is
Clear filter text. No labels found for deployments. Try a different search term. Group.
okay, so the least we can do is maybe add a tab index so that at least it's in the tab order, and then when you reach it, it would be read out. And there's something better that we can do, which is a role again. So there's a role status, and the point of role status is to announce things that happen while you're interacting with the UI. And you can give it a level of politeness. So ARIA Live can be polite, and it can be assertive. And there's two modes that it supports. Polite will basically wait its turn until there is nothing to announce, and then it will announce. Assertive will block you and announce it. And this feels like a place for assertive, because if there is nothing, if there are no labels, and we already know, we can stop the user from typing. We can tell them that there is nothing. So for example,
D E P F. No labels found for DEPL. Full stop. Try a different search term.
so you see it even interrupted the letter that was being typed. It played a tiny ding, and it says no labels found. And this is similar to the visual experience that we expect. So again, we made a component out of it. If you want, you can use it. And so these are the lessons from this one. So there's, of course, everything before. And the new ones are roles have to scale for user-generated content. So if there is content that there can be a lot in, then maybe it's not a form, maybe it's a list box. And errors and warnings also have to be accessible. Of course, there's more, but I've run out of time, so I'm going to stop here. For people who like to take photos of slides, this is the photo slide. And oh shit, now I'm actually taking photos. I'll wait. OK. And yeah, so the links, all of the links I talked about are here. If you want some fresh garbage, you should follow me on Twitter.
That's enough from both of us.
Thank you.